when we get to the Q&A answer session, we'll go ahead and get to those. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Corey. So I do have a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording the presentation part of this webinar. Tanya and I will present probably for up to half an hour. Once we are done presenting, I will do the overview. She will talk about the review. During that time, please put your questions in the chat so Corey can organize them. Once we're done, we should have about half an hour left. At that time, we are going to stop recording. We want you to feel at ease asking your questions. If you have a question, probably 15 of your colleagues here also have the same question. So we're going to stop recording. We're going to answer the questions that have come up in the chat while I was presenting and while Tanya was presenting. We'll probably spend about 15 to 20 minutes answering the questions that came up in the chat. After that, feel free to raise your hand. If you raise your hand using the icon in the Zoom, that should bring you to the front of the screen for us, and we will answer the questions live in real time. So that's the first part of the overview webinar. As you might have noticed if you went to our webpage or in our email, we have a second part. And the second part is more of a workshop. It takes a deeper dive. That's at 1 o'clock. And that deeper dive is to answer questions that I get most often. And that is eligibility and budget. So you're welcome to join the 1 o'clock webinar as well. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and I will get started with the presentation. Can everybody hear okay? Any technical issues? Okay, so what I usually do is I don't quite go into presentation mode. That way I can see the speakers on the right side of my screen, and that kind of helps me keep track of if anything's going on or if somebody's putting their hand up. So today is the R35 overview. I invite people that are interested in the program, institutional officials to come and learn about the program. You have myself, Alyssa Schaefer, my colleague, Tanya Pasternak, and our colleague, Corey Kelly. So what we're going to cover today is an overview. This is the 30,000-foot view of this program. I will touch on eligibility, the budget. I will then hand it over to Tanya. She's your go-to person for review questions. We will then talk about next steps, and we will have plenty of time for questions and answers. So what is the R35? Is it just 34 greater than R01? Well, not quite. The R35 is a unique program for NINDS that helps investigators make meaningful contributions to neuroscience by providing greater funding stability, flexibility, and support for overall research projects without the constraint of specific aims. What you say, no specific aims? I've been taught to write specific aims since I was in kindergarten. Yes, that is what is unique about the R35. It is intended to support most of your NINDS mission-relevant research by providing stable funding for up to 8 years. 8 years, you say, I plan to win the lottery by then. Well, for those of you that plan to win the lottery within 8 years from now, so be it. But for those of you that are passionate and plan to stay in science, this might be the right fit for you. Your budget will be commensurate with your 4-year NINDS funding average. The R34 is somewhat unique. It has a floor and it has a ceiling. So when we say your budget will be commensurate, it's going to fit within this $350,000 minimum and the $750,000 maximum. What does that mean for me You might ask, I only have one grant and it's $218,000. Well, for you, you will be bumped up to the $350,000 floor. Or you might be the person that right now, at this particular point in time, you have 4 grants and they are almost $1 million in direct cost. In this particular instance, you might be looking at a cut. However, you will have that 8 years of stability. So it's a balance and something to consider as you think about, is this the right fit for me at this time? One of the questions I get very commonly is, am I eligible? Most of you here today probably are writing grants within the mission of NINDS, neurological disorders and stroke. But there's this alphabet soup, this inside the Beltway government, letters and numbers. What do they mean? And how do I know what year my grant was funded? You guys in the government use a different calendar than us normal people. So you should have at least one of the following types of active NINDS grants within each of the past 5 consecutive years. So that means fiscal year 19 to 2023 at the time of submission. And I'll give you a hint how you can figure out what calendar we use in government versus the normal calendar. And those grants would be the R00, the R01, which you're all familiar with, the RF1. The RF1 is basically the R01 that is multi-year funded. Some of you might have a HEAL grant, and that HEAL grant is going to come to you with all the money up front. Then there's the R37. The R37 is what we call the Javits Award. It really was an R01 when you applied to us, but we converted it to a different number just to make your life more complicated. Then there's the R56. Oh, that's a bigger number. That must be even better. Well, the R56 is just another letter and number soup for what is the Bridge Award. And Bridge Award is basically the institute saying, we have confidence in you. We're going to give you funding for 1 year. You're just past our pay line, but we have confidence that if we give you 1 year of bridge money, you're going to come back in and get the R01. Then there are a couple of other letters, DP1 and DP2. These are essentially NIH's high-risk, high-reward grants. They too are multi-year funded upfront. Some of you already have an R35. You are in your 7th or 8th year. You too are eligible to apply for a new R35. I have a couple of tips here to orient you towards our fiscal year. Check your eligibility and check your budget. So that's NIH Reporter. This is what it'll look like. So if you Google NIH Reporter, you can put in your last name, comma, first name, and that will list your grants by fiscal year. It's pulling from the database we use, so to guarantee you're in the right fiscal year and kind of give you that assurance what year your grant was funded in. I'll go into more detail on this at 1 o'clock, and we'll have more time for questions and answers, very specific to eligibility and budget. So who should apply? What is the right fit for an R35? Well, NINDS is committed to supporting investigators across a broad spectrum of career stages and lab sizes. We place significant value on high quality mentorship and inclusive training environments. We encourage eligible women and individuals from diverse backgrounds to apply. Investigators should determine if this research program is the best fit for their research goals. The R35 does require a minimum 50% effort for the duration of the award for the 8 years. And this is not the right fit for everybody. There is a commitment However, that is balanced by having those 8 years, having that funding stability, and having the flexibility. So that's where you want to take a minute, take a step back, think about what's the direction of your lab and your research, and what is the right fit for you. I'm going to take a minute. There are a couple of you here that do have an active R35. So what does this mean for you at this point in time? Current R35 recipients can submit a new R35 application in years 7 or 8 of your active R35 award. You can also submit other overlapping grants, research project grants like an R01 to NINDS during this period. So basically you are figuring out where things might end up for year 9, and you can play both sides of the card. You will have to choose though between either the new R35 or the other NINDS grants if they all receive fundable scores. A question I also get a lot is about budget. And there is kind of specific details in this FOA, R35 RFA, about the budget. And at 1 o'clock, I'll give some examples and we will go into more detail. So what we say is the requested R35 budget must be commensurate with your recent level of NINDS support. A lot of people now submit a budget table that is encouraged. If there is a discrepancy, we can quickly delineate where that discrepancy might come from. There is an example on our website, so you can find a template there and just kind of put together a short table, put in your justification, and you should be good to go. So what are the specifics of that? Well, what we're telling you to do in the FOA is to calculate your level of support by using your average direct cost total for the 4 consecutive years out of the 5 most recent fiscal years. So that would be 2019 to 2022 or 2020 to 2023, whichever is greater, of the NINDS eligible awards. That's a mouthful and it sounds like a lot of math. And hey, I went into science because I like writing grants and pipetting. Maybe the math, the average, I forgot. That was a number of years ago, but I will go into more detail and we'll walk through what that looks like. And if you take a look at the FAQs, that should help orient you or your institution that might be doing the budget part of your application for your grant. So I have a hyperlink here and a template. These slides will be made available within the next couple of days, and the recording will also be made available. If you want it right away, last year's is up on our website, and it really has not changed that much. So in summary, is this program the right fit for me? What are the pros? What are the cons? What do I need to consider? Well, it does provide stable funding of $350,000 to $750,000 per year for up to 8 years. It allows you to conduct long-term, rewarding research that is not tied to specific aims. No specific aims, you say. This is different and this is unique. For those of you where this is a mind shift, I do encourage you to reach out to your colleagues that have maybe applied for an R35, either to us or NHLBI or NCI. Ask around. I do know that a lot of people are taking a look at someone else's R35 to really think about what a grant with no specific aims looks like. It also provides you the flexibility to pivot as needed to emerging and timely topics. It supports your research by freeing up time you would otherwise spend applying to multiple grants. So that's pretty much all I have for now. Feel free to start putting your questions on this particular area of the webinar in the chat. Corey is going to look over them. And then after Tanya presents, we will answer those questions. So I'm now handing it over to Tanya. Tanya, I'm going to stop sharing, or do you want me to just move the slides for you?
No, just move the slides.
Okay.
Okay. So it's a challenge for most reviewers who have not reviewed R35s because they are very used to reviewing R1s. Now, the review is going to be very different. So when you prepare your applications, you really have to think from the perspective of the reviewer. What is it they're planning to, what are they going to be asked to do? So the R35 review is much more heavily weighted on the track record of PIs who apply and potential impact that the work is going to have, the ongoing research and the future. The future is really important, as is the past, which is your track record. Can I have the next one? So it's only a 6-page research plan, but you have to think about it very differently from the way you were putting together the R1s. You don't think in terms of specific aims, but the big picture. So you describe your overall vision, the conceptual framework, plan strategies for advancing and retaining the proposed research program in the next 8 years. So it's a pretty major challenge, and it has to be written in a way that is very clear, even though I'm going to try to do my best to bring people with expertise in your specific areas, but generally they are instructed to think big picture. No detailed experimental plan is expected, and preliminary data are not required. And I'm repeating again, there is no specific aims. So the reviewers are asked to assess whether the research program is likely to have an impact on the field, as it has in the past, because clearly you've been funded before, you have experience and history of doing research for quite a few years. So now they're going to have to try to predict the future based on what you have achieved so far. So, so this is a 6-page research plan. Could you give me the next? Right. So I think I saw actually in a chat that someone asking, how do I find the requirements for putting the application together? So you've got to read the RFA for that particular, for the R35s. And what you're going to do, you're going to look at section 4, and I put down here pages 10, 15. That's where it's described and telling you what you're actually supposed to do. So what's different about this particular application, you need to provide the bibliography from the past 5 years. Now, many of you have done work, not for the past 5 years, but you've been working for 20, maybe 30 years, for a very long time. But the idea here is to actually have reviewers pay attention to the last 5 years of the work, to equal the playing field to some extent, because we have some younger investigators that have applied or will be applying for this with less experience, less years, and more. So the last 5 years, reviewers with the type of predictions they're going to have to make based on what you've done so far. Another important feature of this application is going to be for you to provide a 3-page at the most description of your mentoring efforts, your service. Now, mentoring is pretty clear, right? Your how much you've mentored through graduate students, postdocs, undergraduates possibly as well. Also, your service. Now, the service includes the community service, that includes your service to NIH. So it's really quite, it counts if you have been participating, say, in the review process for quite many years as a reviewer, as an example. The inclusion is really quite important, that your history includes your mentoring and service, also that includes the diversity of people you work with, diversity of fields, and diversity of backgrounds. And finally, there is a third requirement, which is for only some of you who are involved in clinical trials, but we're only talking about mechanistic or clinical trials. I'll give you the definition here. It's everywhere. I could in your questions you can ask, and we can try to address it closely. 6 pages additional are going to be needed to help reviewers to evaluate the clinical trials that actually are allowed to be part of that application. Okay, so those are the 3 things that you're going to be, or 2, you're going to be including in your application. Next is next slide. So in general, reviewers are going to be asked to assess the evidence that the contributions you, since you're potential PIs, have made are commensurate with your career stage. So if you've been an assistant or associate professor, assistant professor for the 5 years, 5 years or 10 years, the expectations are going to be commensurate with the time of work, with the time that you've actually spent doing research. They're also going to look for evidence of the impact of your research program will continue at the same or beyond level as it was during the course of the program. And finally, they are going to be closely looking at the suitability of the R35 mechanism, its unique flexibility, and how it will facilitate your ability to advance your research programs. I could probably give you some examples, or we could talk about it during the discussion. So yeah, so the next steps. So that's all I was going to tell you about the review, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions.
So next step is to read closely the funding opportunity announcement. For scientific questions, you want to go to your program officer, so the person that you are working with that's assigned to your R01 or your current research project grant. Eligibility, policy, budget questions, those can all be directed to me. If you don't remember to direct it to me, don't worry, go right to your program officer. They will direct it to me, and we'll work together, of course, to answer your questions. We have a pretty detailed FAQ page. Just Google NINDS R35 FAQs. There's examples there, videos there. Use that, take a look at it, and that will help you determine your budget and if you're eligible to apply. Take a look at your current research portfolio, talk to your colleagues, and see if this particular research program award is the right fit for you. The applications are due July 13th. It's a 3-year FOA, so we are in the 2nd year of it, which means you can submit, if you don't want to submit this year, you want to think about it, you can submit next year, or if you submit this year and you don't quite get funded, you can submit a new application again next year. Review will be in the fall, which means that these applications go to our January, February council. So scores will be released after council. The funding rate tends to be pretty close to the NINDS pay line. Tanya, do you want to add anything else, or Corey, do you want to chime in with anything?
Maybe we should, if you have some relevant questions now, Corey, from the floor, that would be great. We could try to address it.
Sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. I'm also going to stop recording, and then we will go through the FAQs, and then I can see your face if you want to share your video. And we'll go through the questions that came up in the chat, as well as after we go through those, you can put your hand up and we will answer the questions live. Okay, so Corey sent me some questions. He organized them. Okay, so first question, kind of housekeeping stuff. Actually, let me just see my in the right spot here. Okay, so the 1 p.m. webinar, yes, we can record that. Just want to make sure I stopped recording here. Actually, I'll stop recording after I answer the questions. After I answer the questions in the chat. That way you'll have them if you go to our website. So the 1 p.m. will be recorded. Slides will be shared on our website. Just Google NINDS R35 and you should be able to find the website. If we have an investigator with an active R35 in year 7 or 8, does the next R35 application include a progress report from the previous R35? The answer to that is no. It's just a new R35. It's a type 1, so you don't need the progress report. Am I still eligible if my R01 is supported by both NINDS and NHLBI? It depends. I would check the system. So you can just follow up with me and see if we are the administrative, if we're the administrative party IC of your grant. Does it count if I received funding from an R01, but was not the lead PI? If you received an R01 and it's a multi-PI grant, that does count. So you can have a mix of multi-PI grants and single PI grants, and that will allow you to be eligible. However, if you're a co-I, so I know the terminology is government and NIH word soup. If you have more questions about this, just check NIH Reporter. If your name comes up on the grant, basically in the title and then investigator, then you are a PI on that grant. Can I have 2 different research topics in the research plan? Yes, you can. And that is what is kind of unique about the R35. Maybe you're somebody that has 2 or 3 different R01s and you want to use the R35 to kind of not just focus on a project, but really think about your lab as a portfolio, as a program. So this is where the R35 really is unique. They can be somewhat different, but of course you want to be somebody that has the capability and the capacity to lead 2 different or even 3 different projects, not exactly the same, but still within your field of expertise. So this is where the science really is kind of unique and different in an R35. For the budget, is the budget subject to that administrative cut you get on the R01? No, it's not. These are priority scored. The budget that you submit, if it's the correct budget, that should be commensurate with your 4 past years. There are no cuts. The other point with the budget is that it's flat, fixed. When you say, let's say they're coming in at $500,000, it's basically $500,000 for 8 years. So that's it, 500,000 direct cost. You know that that money is going to be awarded to you year after year after year for 8 years. It seems that we can ask for a 20% increase from the average of the 4-year support. Is this true? Yes, that's in the FOA. As long as you can justify it, that is true. For those that do have an active R35, you're in your 7th or 8th year, that also applies to you. Suppose one wants to submit an R35 that involves a collaborative team effort, such as drug discovery and development. Can the budget be used to support colleagues that participate in the project, such as medchem, pharmacokinetics, and or outsource certain activities to companies that perform certain aspects of the research? Yes, this can be done. You can continue your collaborative efforts. If you already have that in your R01, they would basically, the collaboration the co-investigators, all that would be subsumed within the R35. And so that would continue. However, I'm going to hand it over to Corey for a minute because we do have another program that is quite team science focused. Corey, can I have you turn on your camera? I know questions are piling in, but can I have you speak to the RM1 for a minute?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of questions. There we go. Sorry, camera's a little bit. Yeah, so the we have sorry about my camera. We have a new NINDS program called the Combined Program. And this is a team science focused program for 3 to 6 investigators who are all seeking to pursue a single research goal. And each investigator brings distinct expertise to it to solve that problem or to achieve that goal. It's a 5-year award. The critical things to think about for that award, if you're considering it, is that we're looking for transformative science. So science that's paradigm shifting, science that's going to change the field that you're working in. And we're looking for integration. So like I said, you should bring together PIs with distinct non-overlapping expertise, but they're all focused on a single goal. The other things to think about with that one, I think that's pretty much the main components of that. The application due dates for that are October each year. And we will be having a webinar on June 28th if you'd like more information.
Yeah, so if you're not single PI focused, you might want to consider the RM1. So next question. So I have an RF1. So what's an RF1? An RF1 is basically the same thing as an R01. It's just that NIH, because of how it needs to appropriate money, is giving all the money up front. So an RF1 could still be 5 years. But instead of giving $250,000 a year, it's giving that $1,250,000 right up front. So how do we look at it for your R35 budget? We basically look at it the way it's intended to be used. So we're going to divide it over, if it's a 5-year award, we're going to divide it over the 5 years. Even though you got that money, that million and change all in the first year, we're not using that million to count towards your R35 budget in 1 year. And we're saying, well, the intent is you're using an equal proportion in each and every year. So that's how that will be reflected in your budget. So yes, it's prorated and does not count all in 1 year. So next area of questions. If I have an R01 that is only in its first year and I were to apply and receive the R35, what happens to the R01? Okay, so this is where when we say your budget of the R35 is commensurate with what you were getting before, this is where your R35 is basically taking what you're doing now, what's been active, and you now are replacing it with an R35. Okay, so that R01 is going to be subsumed within the R35, is going to be terminated. You cannot have both the R01 and the R35 because it's like we're giving you a pumpkin pie and you want both the apple pie and the pumpkin pie. You can't have both. We give you one pie, not 2 pies at the same time. I have an R01 with NINDS. Can I combine this with the R35 grant? The R01 will roll into the R35. If you have an R01 in NCE, are you eligible? Yes. We do provide an exception. We do look for the 5 years, but one of those years can be a no-cost extension. If an R01 is awarded, what implications does it have for new applications for R01 grants during the period of the R35 award? Once you get the R35 award, and one of the reasons why we say, you have to commit 50%, and is this really the right fit for you? is because we do not award other R01 type of grants to you from NINDS while you have the R35. The R35 is really intended for you to focus on that research within the R35, to be in your lab, to mentor, to not be writing more grants. That's the intent of the R35. So if you're not comfortable with not being able to hold more R1s from NINDS, that's where you really want to think about the program and is it the right fit. Can you tell us how many R35s were funded by NINDS last year and how many proposals were received, essentially the success rate? So we do post our recipients on our website. That information is publicly available. We will be posting the recipients from this year on our website within the next week or two. We do pay attention to the pay line, the success rate, and essentially we keep the success rate of the R35 essentially equal to the pay line we have for our R01s. For grants that need to be relinquished, how do you handle subcontracts to collaborators? So essentially your R01 is being folded into the R35. Whatever was being done in the R01 is now going to be done in the R35. So it's basically, you're just kind of putting a new costume on your R01 and changing the name. But these aspects to your collaborators and your subcontracts, it's pretty much the same, it doesn't change. Tanya, there are some review questions. Corey posted them in the Teams chat. Are you able to see them?
Hold on, yes. Are specific sections like vertebrate animals, biohazards, authentication of reagents and so forth should be included? Yes, they're there. They're included. Okay, without specific aims, this is a good question. How should I restructure the 6-page research strategy? You provide, first of all, this is a general advice, and that I gave it to myself when I was still writing grants, and I'll give it to everybody else. Particularly for this kind of a program, you don't write it for the colleagues in your lab. It has to be understood maybe by your colleagues in a different department. Just have somebody else read it who is not specifically involved in what you do now, who knows every detail of your procedures. It's really important that it's accessible. I've seen last year, I've seen occasions where it was basically incomprehensible to intelligent reviewers who actually have a general big knowledge, who were not working in that specific field very closely. Make it accessible and focus on what they need to focus on. And you could see what they need to focus on by looking at section 5, sorry, where it talks about the review. I think it's probably the best advice I could give to anybody after having many, many years of experience of actually dealing with writing my own grants and so forth and reading them. So, but still, how would you structure it? Provide the background, highlight your proudest achievements and important, the work you feel is most important that you've accomplished in the past 5 years or whatever, right? And the third part will be, what do you want to do? Again, the big picture. Make it accessible. I cannot repeat it often enough. I hope it's probably, I'm telling you something that you probably already know. So I hope it's not, you don't feel it's condescending, but it's really quite important that you don't write it for your closest colleagues, but for people who actually, intelligent people who actually generally have a good knowledge of neuroscience. Does that help? Okay.
Okay, so
let's see.
are there more questions for you, or do you want me? I can go back. We still have time. We still have over 15 minutes. Maybe we'll answer about 7 more minutes, questions in the chat. And then for those that want to kind of have that back and forth, I will stop recording, and then we can also have that more verbal back and forth. So I have a question about a UO1. So the UO1 does not count. Some of the more milestone-driven grants, UO1s, R61, R33, they are not part of what would be a good fit to go from something that's milestone-driven to an R35. So it's really about the progression of, are you kind of the single PI type of lab that really has your meat and potatoes R01 or a couple of R01s, and you're kind of thinking about more of a programmatic approach for your lab that is research project oriented. So that's where the R35 is a good fit. But depending on how you orient your research, not everything translates well into an R35. So that's where you reach out to your program officer and you kind of, or your colleagues or your VP of research, your research office, and you kind of think about what is the right fit. I have a subcontracted an R01 from a collaborator. Does the sub count as my funding? No, the sub doesn't count as your funding. So that's where you would go into NIH Reporter, take a look at what you have in there. Anything that's R1 or pretty much R1 like from NINDS, that's what counts. However, in direct costs. So one caveat is that NIH Reporter is now total cost. So you want to look at the direct costs. What grants does one give up if receiving an R35? Is it all of my NIH grants? What about DOD or HHMI? That's a good question. It's only your NINDS grants. So that's because for us, we need things to be cost neutral. Congress doesn't think we're the greatest place on the planet, so they're not giving us all sorts of money. So we do have limited funding, and we work within that, so we need things to be budget neutral. So it's your NINDS grants. You do not give up, let's say you have NCI or NHLBI, you do not give that up. If you have DOD, you do not give that up. Let's see, I think I have to jump down.
Just mention one more thing that I forgot to answer, whether it was a question about preliminary data. It's not required. You certainly can provide it if you feel it's going to clarify things or talk about feasibility of the work that you're proposing. That certainly is fine. It just doesn't need to have it. Sorry, done.
Continuous submission. It's not quite called continuous submission, but if you have service to NIH, you served on study section, or you're on our one of our councils. Yes.
Yeah, it's within 2 months of the application deadline. So if you are serving on a study section now, for example, you could submit it at July 13th plus 14, July 27th. You have an extra. It can't be any time in a year. For instance, if you did serve on the study section in January, it's not going to apply.
Although there's one clarification. If you are continuous submission eligible, you're a regular study section member or a council member, then you will get the 2-week grace period for this to submit this application.
Yeah, it does apply to this.
It's still the same 2-week, right? So
it's 2 weeks.
You
get a
so
2-week
that doesn't
extension.
change really.
But it doesn't have to be, if you're a regular member, it doesn't have to be within 2 months.
You can still have
or a
2
month.
weeks.
Yeah, anyway, but if you're an ad hoc member, it has to be, you can't have ad hoc reviewed a year and a half ago and claim that, it's taking too much, anyway.
Ernie is the chief of a scientific review branch. So he knows all of that.
Okay, and it is a special emphasis panel, so it will come to NINDS. So it is priority scored, it's not percentile. So you definitely do want to wait for after our council to kind of have a sense of where this will land in terms of our funding pay line for this particular mechanism. Are there samples available? For the R35, we do not have a sample available. What I suggest you do is you can look at our recipient R35 recipient page. There are a number of recipients. At this point, now that we're 7 years in, a number of people have applied either to us or NHLBI or NCI. So reach out to your colleagues or your research office and ask them to maybe share their application. It does not have to be somebody that got an award. Just looking at someone's application and speaking with investigators, they have said, you know, this really helps them pivot from thinking about an R01, which has been so ingrained in us, R01 specific aims, and this truly is a mind shift for both applicants, you know, no specific aims, like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do, but there are applications and awards out there. Feel free to take a look at that. And reviewers, many of them already have an R35 or have applied. They have, at this point in the game, have made that mind shift. So you really want to tell that story about how the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we understand this is a different way of writing a grant, but this is your turn to tell your story. What's the big picture? What's the vision? Where am I going with this? Okay, I have questions on budget. If the current grant has a modular budget, should we plan on the 350? Yes, you come in and that 350 is the 350 for the 8 years. I have an R01 that is due to renew in June. Can I use this direct cost? How can I get the notice of award in time? It should count if it's funded in 2023. I will kind of look up to August, and that's what I'm looking for. I believe I have eligibility with the NINDS R01. I also have a HEAL, so that's helping end addiction long term. A HEAL R61, R33. Can I include that in the budget average calculation? Okay, here's where I'm going to get all inside the beltway on you and talk to you kind of about congressional appropriations and budget for a minute. So Congress appropriates, but they appropriate in more than one way. Appropriate, they give NIH money and other federal agencies. They give us our base budget. Here you go, NIH, fund those R01s, you know, until you spend all the money. But then they also have very specific things that are written into legislation. That's law. And they're telling NIH, maybe very specifically, they're telling NINDS, you get this money in a separate bank account, and you can only spend it on this. You can only spend it on HEAL. You can only spend it on brain. You can only spend it on ALS. What does that mean for you? It means R35 comes out of our base appropriations. So if you have an R01, it gets rolled into the R35. If you have HEAL, you keep the money. You can have both. You can have both the R35 and HEAL or brain. If this doesn't make sense, you have to think about what Congress told us to do. Congress said, brain money is for brain money. You cannot take it away and use it for something else. So that's why there's, if you look at the FOA, we delineate, and on our website, we delineate if it's HEAL, brain, AD, ADRD, you hold that money in conjunction with the R35. Can the case of having an R35, can you apply for other NINDS grants? Yes and no. You basically cannot apply for your run-of-the-mill R01, but because there is the set aside congressional appropriations, HEAL, BRAIN, AD, you can in fact apply to things where the money is directed. HEAL, BRAIN, AD, clinical trials, biomarkers, and we do have the list in the FOA. Take a look at that because there are a number of exceptions. And that list is not actually an exhaustive list. When we wrote the FOA 2 years ago, some things didn't quite exist at that point in time. So talk to your program officer, double check, and there are things that you can continue to hold and continue to apply for. I am going to stop recording. I think there's maybe more questions in the chat, but I do want to give people a chance to raise their hands and speak up. And don't forget, right after this at 1 o'clock, we go into more detail with budget and eligibility.